Well, it's kind of an interesting story, I must admit. My mom, as I told you, was from Minnesota. My dad at that time was a coach, and they didn't make much money. And my mom was getting ready. I think it was for my birthday, which is in June. And a lady, when she was out looking for, I guess, outfits for me, came up to her and said, "You know what? Your little boy looks just like the family in our catalog. Would it be possible for him to be a model from our catalog?" And my mom, not knowing anything about the business or even who this lady was, said, "Well, I don't know. I don't know if he could even do that. I just don't know." And the lady said, "Well, you know what? We could pay him, and he could keep all the clothes that he would wear." My mom said, "He could probably do that." So that's actually how I started. But what a lot of people don't realize is at that time, television was very, very young. Now, television has been around probably, there were broadcasts even of the Olympics in Berlin in 1936. But there really wasn't a television market here until the early 50s. And in like 1948 and 49, when televisions actually came out, a lot of people would stand in front of stores and watch the TV just to see it. And in the early 1950s, maybe one family on the block would have a television, and it was a huge event. And people, all the neighbors would come over to watch. And then 51, 52, people started buying televisions. Well, there were no child actors because all the TV at that time was live. Now you say, well, it's Hollywood. There were actors. Well, yeah, there was Liz Taylor and Mickey Rooney, but they all worked on film. All that television at that time was live. And so when they wanted a child to be able to go out and walk onto a stage, and they usually had audiences, and work, there really weren't. In New York, on Broadway, were the children that worked on live stage in front of an audience. In Los Angeles, there really wasn't that big of a theater community. So they thought to themselves, well, which children work live? And it was the models, because after you did the catalog work and the catalogs went out, then you would do fashion shows. So when I was around 2 years old, I would go with my mom and we'd do a fashion show, and a model would take your hand and you'd walk out and turn around. And so my very first job was when I was 2 years old. And Ed Wynn, they used to have, I think it was called Colgate Variety Hour, but was one of the many variety shows that they had about at that time with a different host each week. But Ed Wynn had like every third week that he would host this show. And I would then do a commercial. And what I would do is Pet Milk, which is now used, I think, for cooking. It's a canned milk, was at that time used as baby formula. And they had a huge barroom scene where all these cowboys were fighting, and Ed Wynn, who was pretty much a vaudevillian actor, but he did some movies, but he was much more famous for vaudeville, would be behind the bar as the bartender, and I would come in, and I had a 10-gallon hat and 6 guns and diapers and, of course, big cowboy boots. And the swinging doors, I'd come through the swinging doors, and I had all these stuntmen who were fighting, and they were breaking those bottles over each other's head, and it was a huge fight scene as supposedly a Western bar. And I would walk up, and one of the cowboys would pick me up and set me on the bar, and I would pound on the bar, and my first lines were, "I'm the toughest hombre in these parts, and you better have my brand." And then Ed Wynn would pull from behind the bar a can of Pet Milk and do his commercial. So once you did one of those shows and walked out and did everything right, then you worked all the time, because they were afraid if another child would walk out and become disorientated or didn't say the line or wandered off or started crying, that's what went out over the air. So because of that, I started to work all the time in live TV of the early 1950s. I did December Bride, The Ray Bolger Show, just all sorts of different, a lot of them were variety shows at that time, because they didn't really, December Bride was a continuing comedy, but I worked a whole lot on all those shows. And I was doing a show called Lux Video Theater, which actually wasn't a variety show. It was more drama. And At that time, even the commercials were live. Now, I had done some movies before that, like the one with my sister, This Is My Love, and a few other small parts, but no big parts in a movie.